Yeah, a lot of people kind of accuse this of being like a movie about video games for people who don't play video games, and I suppose I'm not the one to counteract that criticism. We have David Cronenberg's eXistenZ.
eXistenZ. It's new, it's from Antenna Research, and it's here.
We got like a fucking dad bod belly on the front, and there's your side. If you go to our Blu-ray audit video where I talked about this when it arrived in the mail, we were pontificating on what the hell this was because we hadn't seen it yet, and now we know. But this is essentially your little plug for the gaming system that goes in the little tramp stamp spot, the lower back, you know what I'm saying? So this is a textured slip box. They said it was flesh textured. I'm not really sure what it feels like to me, but it is absolutely, certainly like uniquely textured compared to literally everything else in my collection. Unfortunately, this box is sold out now, and so is the booklet and the slipcover, but you can still get the standard edition, and I'm sure if you really want it, there are copies of this floating around. So let me continue the unboxing for you. Here we have the cover, which I like a lot. And I'm just now realizing that I know what this is now. We have the organic kind of like bone gun on the front. Embossed text for the title. And we have the gaming console on the back here. And then reversible cover art, though it's not necessarily original cover art. There's your special features if you'd like to pause there. And 2-disc set, 4K and Blu-ray. And we also have our booklet. It's one of these perfectly bound books, as they call them. Play it, live it, kill for it. Sure. I think I can get away with showing this. Yeah, nothing crazy in there. This one has a lot of still images, because the essays aren't particularly long, and I guess they had to fill it out to fit in this box. But, I don't know. eXistenZ is essentially about a company that creates a virtual reality gaming system that is made out of flesh and is its own living organism that you then plug into your own body such that it becomes like that. It is the controller and you become the console, and it transports you into a sort of hyper-realistic VR world where it's still clear that you're in a video game because all the NPCs like react very strangely and become kind of stuck in a loop if you don't provide them with their like needed dialogue and stuff like that. It's hard to talk about this film without spoiling too much of it, so I will avoid that to the best of my ability because I really think that this is best gone into blind. But essentially you have Jude Law's character, who is just kind of like a hired bodyguard for the VR company, and at the debut of their new gaming system called eXistenZ, a terrorist kind of takes over and attempts to kill the game designer, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. So he takes her and they go into hiding essentially, and while she has a bounty on her head, she also wants to ensure that her gaming system has survived the attack and wants to test it out. And Jude Law's character has actually never played the game because he's afraid of what it will do to his body. She eventually convinces him and they go through the game, and all sorts of wacky twists and turns ensue. I think that's all I want to say in regards to the plot, because like I said, it really starts to get wild, and I don't want to rob you of that experience if you've never seen it before. There were like Region B copies of this floating around, I think, but I think that this has been either out of print or never on Blu-ray in the United States for a very long time. Vinegar Syndrome has blessed us with this new 4K presentation, and I will say that the 4K itself looks absolutely immaculate. Like, it looks perfect. One of the better transfers I've seen all year. Like, in terms of audio-visual presentation, I would give this, and like restoration, I'd give this like a perfect 10 out of 10. It just looks incredible. And the film itself, I really loved. I think that it feels extremely prescient. Like, it's one of these films that it's hard to believe it came out when it did. This is from '99. It really feels like it is commenting on issues that we are struggling with today. Like, I know that AI is kind of the big thing right now, and less so VR, but they still feel very similar, and they still feel as though, it still feels as though the film is commenting on similar things. There's also, I believe Apple has just come out with their premium VR device, and, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and his fucking metaverse shit is really big, or at least is attempting to be really big. And I think it and AI kind of go hand in hand in this like desire to let technology and tech kind of, that's saying the same thing twice. This kind of desire to let tech take over the experience of real life or to replace human beings. VR, I think, is substantially less dangerous than AI, but I do think that there are legitimate philosophical and practical concerns to be had with it, and I think that Cronenberg really understood this and depicts these problems really well. Now, a quick disclaimer is that I'm not at all a gamer, nor have I really ever been. I mean, I used to play video games when I was a kid, but they mainly make me frustrated, and I don't really have a lot of fun with them. And I don't know, when I'm going to experience art, I want the art to take me on a journey. I don't want to be the one in the driver's seat there. Like, it just feels fundamentally different, and I don't know. They're like, watching a movie is not skill-based. Reading a book is not necessarily skill-based. Listening to a piece of music, you know? Whereas with video games, it feels like you have to like, it requires a level of skill. There's a barrier to entry, especially with some of these harder games. And so, you know, it just hasn't been for me in a very long time. So again, I'm not the best person to be judging how this captures the experience of playing games, even though it is something I do have some amount of experience with. Particularly the way that NPCs are portrayed feels really accurate, and he really captures the uncanniness of it in like a real world setting or like a live action setting. Video game movies are notoriously not very good, because I think that this is not necessarily attempting to adapt one in particular. It's kind of taking on video games as a concept and virtual reality as a concept. I think Cronenberg is kind of the perfect person to do it. This sort of disconnect between the mind and the body, and attempting to utilize the body to create a fictional kind of virtual universe that you can inhabit. Yeah, a lot of people kind of accuse this of being like a movie about video games for people who don't play video games, and I suppose I'm not the one to counteract that criticism, but I do know that Cronenberg was playing a lot of games at the time that this was created, at the time that he came up with the idea for the script. He was also inspired a lot by the fatwa on Salman Rushdie, this kind of idea of terrorist attacks on creative figures. He's really interested in this idea that two people can have such opposing views of morality and of the world that they would be willing to kill each other over it, you know? And that, coupled with his exploration of, I mean, it's not exactly an original idea, and it's kind of like, when you say it out loud, it kind of feels like a pothead kind of pontificating on philosophy, this kind of like idea where you don't know what is real and what is fake. You don't know what is actually happening and what is in a game. But I really do feel that Cronenberg captures that anxiety and that kind of existential terror really well as the film progresses. I mean, I could talk more about it. Like, the performances are excellent. I think that they are good and bad in the ways that they need to be. I love the production design here. I love the special effects. It's just a film that I can see myself revisiting time and time again. And I kind of did, watching all these commentaries, and I never got tired of it. And I always found something new to appreciate. There's tons of memorable scenes in here. It's just generally a really, really great film, and I think I landed on an 8 out of 10 for this one. I highly recommend it. So now that I've kind of rambled enough about the film itself, let's get into the special features.
Step into my office.
So in terms of the special features, there are a lot of them. This is one of their more packed editions, I think, which is great because, you know, this is a pretty big get for them, like a pretty major work from Cronenberg's filmography. They went all out for it, and I think that it deserved it. So let's see. We had 4 commentary tracks, which was absurd. Like, I looked at that and I was like, what am I doing? Am I gonna be able to do this? Do I need to give up now? I didn't. I listened to them all. But 4 commentary tracks. One of them is brand new, and 3 of them are archival. It's nice that we are covering our bases with like the stuff that's already been out there on previous releases and also adding new stuff. I think that is really cool. So the new commentary track is with film historian Dr. Jennifer Moorman. This is the best one, I think. If you only listen to one, make it this one. It is so good. It is just an excellent academic and analytical commentary track. It really does a great job of exploring the roles that philosophy and gender play in the film. You know, existentialism, given the title, and also the gender and sexual dynamics in the film are really quite interesting, and she has a lot of insightful things to say about it. Particularly the ways that sex is subverted, and throughout the film, the male body is the one that is most often subjected to penetration and discomfort. It's really fascinating, and of course there are really interesting ideas as they relate to like women in video games and Gamergate specifically. I think that this was rather prescient in how women in this industry are treated and how angry dudes can get at their mere presence in positions of power. The next is an archival commentary track with the director, one Mr. David Cronenberg. You may have heard of him. It's not like a ton of insight in it, but I just like listening to David Cronenberg talk about really anything, but his own movies is always fun, right? So the whole thing is really listenable and enjoyable. If you want to listen to a director's commentary here, I don't think you'll be disappointed with this track. The next is an archival commentary track with the cinematographer, Peter Szczycki. I don't recommend this one. I think you can go ahead and skip it. There's not a ton of insight or even like a lot of discussion. I definitely skipped around on this one. And then finally, there is an archival commentary track with the visual effects supervisor, Jim Isaac. This one is excellent. I really think it should have been a select scene commentary because he really only has things to say about the scenes with lots of visual effects in them. And so there's a lot of like nothing throughout this commentary as he's waiting for the next big like VFX showcase. And so yeah, I think we could have made this a select scene one, but it's really good and it's worth watching, I think. So in terms of the actual features, we have an interview with the art director Tamara Deverell on building the worlds of eXistenZ. She discusses working as one of the few women in production design in Canada. She first worked with Cronenberg on Crash, another excellent film, by the way, and talks about how she always felt his films had a sense of humor. And when they discussed that, he said that he was glad that she saw that in his films because most people miss it. She also discusses how prescient she feels the themes are and how concerning she finds the way VR is going. I think she even made a comment about like how her kids have VR game systems and that she sees them going through the same things these characters go through, where they just get sucked in and they sometimes have trouble distinguishing reality from virtual reality, and she finds it concerning and feels that this film was ahead of its time. She also makes an interesting point about how as a production designer you kind of have to accept and come to terms with the fact that the camera is not going to capture all the hard work you've done, and some of it will just be lost forever. Like, you can spend a lot of time on this one particular aspect of the production design, but if it doesn't make sense for the shot, it's either going to just be a flash in the pan in the background, or it's not even going to be in the shot at all. And so you've done all that work for something that makes sense as a whole. It contributes to the overall experience of the production design and the overall aesthetic and the overall look. But specific things you spent a lot of time on or put a lot of creative energy into just might not ever show up in the way that you would like them to. I thought that was really interesting, and she talks about how that's just a necessary part of doing this work, is accepting that that will happen. Next is a interview with the makeup effects artist, Stefan Dupuis. I'm always fucking these people's names up, I'm sorry. It's a really great interview. He discusses how many of the effects were achieved and the kind of philosophy behind them. He says that the hardest take or the hardest shot in the whole film was when the waiter's face explodes, but he did it in one take because it would have been very difficult to do it more than once. Next is an interview with the producer, Robert Lantos. He just calls Cronenberg a genius. Next is an interview with the opening title designer, Robert Pieleczowski. It's a really cool and unique look into the craft of creating opening title designs. He describes the opening title sequence as a short film within the film itself, like that's how he approaches them. And that their purpose is to set the tone and the aesthetic of the film rather than just showing you the title and the cast. And he kind of bemoans how title sequences, I think Cronenberg says this at some point too, how past the age of television, films kind of forgot that this is its own section in the film that can be like artistic, and they kind of just copy the method of putting titles on the screen as the film is progressing, because that's a time-saving measure. It's not really an artistic choice. most of the time, but a lot of people are sort of relying on that. I thought that that was really interesting, and I love a good title sequence, so I recommend that interview. Next, this is maybe my favorite feature on here, other than that commentary. It's a full-length documentary. It's called Frame by Frame, The Invisible Art of Production Designer Carol Spear? S-P-I-E-R, I'm so sorry. It's really great. It's about her, but it also kind of doubles as a making of documentary on eXistenZ, because it kind of follows her as she's crafting the production design for this film in particular. I thought there was a super interesting section on it about how the special effects department and the production design department work together kind of in tandem, because the idea is that like you need your special effects to work within the context of the production design. You have to know exactly what's going into the production design before you can actually start working on a special effect, and you need to know how it interacts with its environment, what kind of space and what kind of tools you have at your disposal. Yeah, it was just really interesting seeing how the visual effects supervisor like had to follow her everywhere and had to make sure that he understood entirely what was going on the production design side of things so that he could create special effects that actually gelled with the aesthetic and the mechanics of the film. It was also really fascinating to see Cronenberg work in his capacity as a director and how many people just put so much work into this film. It's really just kind of incredible and makes you wonder how a film this weird even gets made with how expensive it is and how many people have to be on board for it. It's really just kind of a small miracle that films like this even exist. I also really like seeing how Carol is basically a director in her own right, like a subsidiary director to Cronenberg. She says that like her policy is that she never ever brings an issue to David unless there is a like significant budgetary restriction and she's exhausted all other options. And he says that what he looks for in a production designer is someone that he can just fully trust to do it and only come to him when there's that budgetary restriction. So you just kind of watch her like directing her own department, and she's basically like a director on the film. And then she goes to the head director whenever there's an actual issue. But basically she just does her job, and she's almost like working in her own little world and like gets that piece of the equation done after she's discussed it with the director. And then he can just focus on directing the actors and workshopping the script and things like that. There is an archival promotional featurette, an archival special effects featurette, and some electronic press kit interviews. There's a lot of like repetition throughout the different special features because they pull a lot of clips from these EPK interviews, but I recommend watching the one from Jude Law, Willem Dafoe, and the special effects guy. Although I will say that archival special effects featurette is a truncated version of that larger interview, so just watch that one. But next we have this booklet. So first, we have an essay from Justin LaLiberty. It's called eXistenZ Y2K and the Virtual Reality Films of the 90s. He kind of just places this in the context of VR as a concept in sci-fi in mid to large budget films in the late 90s and early 2000s, and he specifically hones in on 3 films that came out in 1999 specifically: eXistenZ, The Matrix, and The 13th Floor. So he kind of discusses how they all work within the same themes in the same year, and it's a really interesting read. I don't know that I've ever read one of Justin's essays before, so I really enjoyed it. And then the next essay is called eXistenZ and the Art of Interactivity by John Derringer. This one I definitely preferred and I really enjoyed. This is where I pulled a lot of the information about Cronenberg's relationship to video games, because it discusses it a lot in this essay. It kind of pulls a lot of information from the interviews that he was giving a lot at the time and kind of analyzes where he was at during the making of this film. He talks about how Cronenberg was having a very public kind of debate with himself about whether or not video games constituted art. Now, I personally feel that they do, but he feels that even though he loves them and he thinks that there is a ton of artistic merit to them, he feels that the fundamental difference that I was discussing earlier, how a video game asks the audience to actually participate and kind of direct the experience versus any other medium where the viewer or the audience member is simply like along for the ride. He thinks that distinction matters a lot, and it might actually disqualify video games as being art. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I really liked that. It also goes into Gamergate as well, So I recommend reading that if you are fortunate enough to have a copy, because it is out of print. Remember that Satan loves all of their children. Bye. I'd like to take a moment to thank our newest patrons: Caroline, Karma Popo, Just the Discs, Lacey Silberman, Leona, Michael Hutchins, Nicholas, Noel, Paige, and Phil P. I'd also like to thank our accomplices: Anthony Listro, The Boogeyman's Closet, Carlin Cook, Deanna Vave, The Disconnected, Dustin Putman, George Strang, Julie Humphreys, Nosferatu 1334, Peppa Crab, Sasha Bobashasaurus, and Stephen Perkins. If you'd like to be counted amongst their ranks, the link is in the description.